Hi. So today I had a bit of a Japanese day that I didn't really plan, but it ended up being that. So first I was looking at this list of books that Joshua Cohen made about books that were influenced by Ulysses. I think in that way he means like urban novels that are modernist and um, interesting language. And in that list, he had a book by Yasunari Kawabata, the Nobel Prize winner, and it's called The Scarlet Gang of... It's blocked. It's blocked on the front. The Scarlet Gang of Asakusa, which is a part of Tokyo. I think it's like outside of Tokyo. And in the introduction it says like Montmartre was, or Asakusa is to Tokyo as Montmartre is to Paris, and as Alexanderplatz is to Berlin, and something Times Square is to New York or something like that. And anyway, I thought it was interesting that it's compared to like Berlin Alexanderplatz and Manhattan Transfer, which are two books I really like. And this is kind of going along with kind of just a general interest I've had, which is no surprise, but I really like those interesting modernist novels. I just have them stacked up here on my desk, and I've read about half of them completely, and then I've read some parts of each. But yeah, I guess to go back to my Japanese day, so I read that list by Joshua Cohen yesterday, so I made it my treat after I did all my boring school stuff that I could go to the library after. I had to go to the art museum and write stuff down, so that was boring, and it ended up being right next to the library, so I went there after. And I originally went for that Asakusa book by Kawabata, but then right next to it I saw, and like just out of the the back of my mind, I remember seeing something about The Dancing Girl of Izu by Kawabata. I must have been on Lit, someone talking about it, about like Japanese thread or something. But anyway, I picked it up and to look at it, and when I read the first pages it seemed pretty nice, like I liked the feel of it. About the time the road began to wind and I realized that I was finally near Amagi Pass, a curtain of rain swept up after me at a terrific speed from the foot of the mountain, painting the dense cedar forests white. I was 20 years old. I wore my school cap, hakama, over my indigo-dyed kimono, and carried a student's bag over my shoulder. It was the fourth day of my solitary journey towards the Izu Peninsula. I had stayed at Shuzenji Hot Spring one night, then 2 nights at Yugashima. And yeah, it seemed calm to me, and it ended up being an excellent story. I think it's what made him originally famous, Kawabata, but this section here is really nice. So it talks about how the main character, people are just saying he's a nice person. He's overhearing them as they're walking down the road. This exchange had an echo of simplicity and frankness. And the dancing girl is a child who's in the theater troupe or dancing troupe. Hers was a child's voice expressing her sentiments without censure. I too was able to meekly consider myself a nice person. Refreshed, I lifted my eyes and surveyed the brilliant mountains. I felt a vague pain behind my eyelids. 20 years old, I had embarked on this trip to Izu, heavy with resentment that my personality had been permanently warped by my orphan's complex, and that I would never be able to overcome a stifling melancholy. So I was inexpressibly grateful to find that I looked like a nice person, as the world defines the word. The mountains looked bright, because we were by the ocean near Shimoda. I swung my bamboo walking stick back and forth, lopping off the heads of the autumn grasses. Here and there along the way stood signs as we entered villages. Beggars and itinerant entertainers, keep out. And also someone wrote in this library book an X, which I guess is like a way to signal that pay attention in that section. It's a good section. It's a very good story. But yeah, and then as my day continued, I ended up going to the grocery store, and right in the front they have this like sushi thing, and I never get sushi because I don't really like it. But today I decided to try it, and it was okay. This is grocery store sushi, so it is what it is. But I didn't even realize that I had gotten 2 Japanese books. I mean, of course I knew it, but it must have had something to do with the sushi. Yeah, I've been looking more at these modernist books. Miklos Senkuthi, The Prey, Berlin Alexanderplatz by Doblin, The Man Without Qualities by Musil, Fernando Pessoa, The Book of Disquiet, Manhattan Transfer by Dos Passos, The Sleepwalkers by Herman Broch, Ulysses by James Joyce, Remembrance of Things Past by Proust, and then Adam Buenos Aires by Leopoldo Marechal. Those are the ones I gathered just to look at. And then I also got another interesting book here. I've been wanting it for a while and just never ended up getting it, but then I decided to, because I found it for a decent price. It's poems by Joseph, I don't know how to say his last name exactly, but I say Kalar. But in the front it has like this anecdote that says it's supposed to be like collar. It's called Paper Mill, Poems 1927 and 1935. In this guy's biography, he was born in 1906, and he graduated from college and taught for 1 year. But then he went and worked in the lumber mills in Minnesota, and that's what he wrote a lot of his poems about. He also published in like leading socialist newspapers at the time, publishing his poems somewhat, but one of his poems was especially famous, and it's called Paper Mill. So I'll just read it here. Not to be believed, this blunt savage wind, blowing in chill empty rooms, this tornado, surging and bellying across the oily floor, pushing men out in streams before it. Not to be believed, this dry fall of unseen fog drying the oil and emptying the jiggling grease cups. Not to be believed, this unseen hand weaving a flimsy rust of spider webs over these turbines and grinding gears, these snarling chippers and pounding Jordans, these fingers placed to lips saying, shh, keep silent, keep silent, keep silent. Not to be believed hardly this clammy silence, where once feet stamped over the oily floor. Dinner pails clattered, voices rose and fell, in laughter, curses, and songs. Now the guts of this mill have ceased, and red changes to black. Steam is cold water, silence is rust, and quiet spells hunger. Look at these men now, standing before the iron gates mumbling. Who could believe it? Who could believe it? That was what he became most famous for, and ended up overshadowing all his other stuff. But he has some very interesting poems. I may do a more in-depth video just about him. because I think he gives, and I think it says somewhere in one of these, the introduction or something, that this thin book gives a better idea of the Depression era than books much longer than it. I think that was by Robert Bly, actually, that said that. I don't know where, but anyway. Yeah. Gives a better sense of these few pages of the mood and suffering of the Depression than much longer books. Robert Bly. So. And then I guess just one fun fact, if you don't know it. You know T.S. Eliot's famous poem, The Wasteland. The original title for it, which really I love way more, is called He Do the Police in Different Voices. That was the title of The Wasteland. And it comes from Dickens' Our Mutual Friend. And the idea of the passage is this old lady is talking about how, I think it's that she doesn't read. And she has like a younger person who reads the newspaper to her. And she's saying to some other people that he reads in such a lively way. And at the very end, she says that he do the police in different voices. like, like a performance. And really, I think that gives a better idea of the wasteland, like the poem itself, than the title The Wasteland. I mean, The Wasteland is kind of simplistic in that way that it's just, all it does is kind of set you up for the sense of a desolate place. But he do the police in different voices. That gives like a feeling of authority and like control. And then it also gives the idea that the poet is somewhat of a court jester or something, entertaining you with different voices. And I don't know. And also it's just like dialectic title. I just think it's perfect. And I've been thinking about it so much. And really, like when you look into T.S. Eliot more, a lot of his poems are funny. Like, maybe not necessarily his most famous ones like The Hollow Man or whatever else, but like the love song of Geoffrey Prufrock has some funny parts. But he also has some poems that I assume he didn't try to make public or popular that are really hilarious. Like, there are some poems where he talks about, I guess, like dating or being with a tall girl, and he writes about it very openly. And I don't know where those poems came from, but yeah, it's very funny. I have a much greater appreciation for T.S. Eliot now. But I guess I'll stop this. But if anyone knows any less common modernist novels, I guess, maybe from less common countries, yeah, let me know. Like, especially if you know any from Brazil, or I know a couple from Spain, but I don't think they're translated, like Pio Baroja. I know wrote some that I don't know if they're considered modernists, but yeah, if you can think of any. Oh, and has anyone read what's his name? Svevo. What was it? Zeno's Conscience. Italo. Is his name Italo Svevo? Yeah, and two things regarding books like this. So there's a book called A Life by Svevo that's coming out, I think February or something of this coming year. And it seems like a very interesting book. It was the first novel he ever published. And it's just about the life of, I think, a guy who wants to become a poet but ends up having to do some practical job. Kind of like Amsterdam Stories, I suppose. Of course, I haven't read the book because it hasn't been translated to English yet, I don't think. But it is coming out, and then also coming out in January, I believe, is a new translation of Berlin Alexanderplatz by Michael Hoffman, who's pretty well known for translating German. But the reason they did a new translation is the old one by Eugene Jolas who was friends with a lot of the modernists, like he knew Joyce, all those people in Paris at the time. But they said that the book doesn't really represent the original, this translation of Dublin. So I'm excited for that, stuff to look forward to. Oh, and also, I recently discovered Ohuz Atai, I don't know how to say his name, the Turkish author who published a book that's translated into English as The Disconnected. And I've been looking at that recently, so I may have I may have a video to make about that if anyone's interested. Yeah, so yeah, feel free to comment. I'm curious about the people that watch these videos, because you know, the view count and the number of comments, there is a discrepancy. So yeah, if everyone who watches this, at least to the end, could leave a comment, maybe their favorite modernist work or favorite modernist poet, or maybe a book that you found interesting from one of my videos, or if you're in college studying literature, yeah, just if you want to leave any comment, I'd enjoy reading it. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. Never forget, death is a gang boss.